Brilliant. We're looking at the Vikings, right? So the first thing, Mike, what do you think about the Vikings?
Well, they had a settlement down at the bottom fields where I live.
What, down in the Isle of Wight?
Yeah,
Right, okay, fair enough. Anything else?
that's all I know.
What do you know about the Vikings, Goff?
Uh, well, only what you've told me and what I've seen, but also, as you know, I went to the Roskilde Viking Museum in Denmark 2 years ago, where they build the boats, and they found the boats, and that was really interesting. But I know that they weren't marauding rapists and murderers. A lot of them were just settlers that came to the UK and integrated with society. Although there was a bit of raping and pillaging, I think, at the start.
There's been a bit of raping and pillaging throughout history.
Yeah.
Now, when we, earlier on, Jessica sent me an article that basically, which basically painted the likes of the Anglo-Saxons being worse than the Vikings, right? So what I'm going to do, we're going to start off with something quite random, and it's nothing to do with the Romans, Mike. Okay, so there you go. So I'm just going to share this on the screen, and now this is to do with what we're doing, but it's slightly off kilter, right? And the one thing that I do say is that first things first, this is a good place to start. An Anglo-Saxon helmet from the British Museum in London was the warrior who owned this helmet the descendant of a more terrifying and brutal invasion than the Vikings? Or what we do know is that this belonged to a Swedish Viking. Anyway, that's another thing altogether. The Anglo-Saxons were worse than the Vikings. The Vikings invaded England in the 800s and the 900s. They plundered, raped, and burned towns to the ground, or at least this is a story we know from school and popular culture. So we've already discussed that that's probably not the case. Nevertheless, the reported plundering and ethnic cleansing are probably overrated. The Vikings simply had worse press coverage by frustrated English monks who bemoaned their attacks. So you were saying that you live near a settlement in the Isle of Wight, which is a Viking settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, a Viking settlement in the Isle of Wight, it actually says it all, that they were settlers.
Well, it was a winter hangout where they used to pull the boats in on the marsh out for winter.
But they were still sort of within the landscape. In recent decades, groundbreaking research in DNA, archaeology, history, and linguistics provide a nuance to the written records, and together they provide a much clearer picture. They indicate that the Vikings were not the worst invaders to England on English shores at this time. That title goes to the Anglo-Saxons 400 years earlier. So I think that's really, really interesting, because what some of the stuff that we will be looking at today is directly linked to a group of Vikings that were slaughtered by the Anglo-Saxons. So Jessica sent me this today, and I thought, well, I may as well start with this anyway. So the Anglo-Saxons inevitably came from Europe, and the area of Germany and Denmark and so on. And then what you then see is the Vikings coming from Scandinavia, and we see a precise moment when the Vikings come from Scandinavia in the year 793, when they're described as being brutalizing and raping and murdering at Lindisfarne, right? But the document that describes the Vikings was actually written by the Anglo-Saxons, or people thereabout. So the Anglo-Saxons eradicated native languages in England, and sometimes in Wales and early Scotland. One support for this contention is the impact, or rather the lack of the impact, that the Viking Old Norse had on contemporary Old English language, or the Anglo-Saxon, when they arrived. This should be compared to the absence of any native language in England in the 400s and the 500s. So in other words, the Anglo-Saxons wiped out in England, and excluding Cornwall, the native tongue of England. That's what the Anglo-Saxons did. So they were far worse than the Normans. They were far worse than the Romans. They were far worse than the Vikings, so the Anglo-Saxons are the ones who are doing the real damage in history. And it's saying that in the 400s and the 500s, the old English, the Anglo-Saxons wiped out whatever language was around in a similar way that modern English eradicated the language of the Native Americans. And it goes on to say that in North America, only 40 Native American words managed to make it into the American English Dictionary. Similarly, only a dozen native, it's saying Celtic words made it into the Old English of the Anglo-Saxons. So in other words, the Anglo-Saxons were completely devastating. And this little bit here, an Anglo-Saxon sells a horse to a Viking. If the Anglo-Saxons eradicated the native tongues of the country when they arrived in the 400s, 500s, 600s, the Vikings' impact was significantly less. Linguists do see some influence from the Old Norse or the Vikings in the Old English language, but it doesn't come close to the eradication of what the Anglo-Saxons did to the native British. So in other words, it's the Anglo-Saxons doing the damage. The Romans weren't like this. The Normans weren't like this. It was the Anglo-Saxons. The Vikings weren't like this. So an example could be somewhere in East England in the 800s where an Anglo-Saxons met a Norseman. So here we go. The Anglo-Saxon wants to sell a Norseman a horse to pull a wagon. In modern English, he'd have said the equivalent of, I'll sell you that horse that drags my wagon. In Old English, it would have sounded like this. Eke sell that horse that draggeth my wagon. And the Norman, on the other hand, would say, Ik mun sell their horse dragon van mine. So in other words, the Viking is speaking something very similar to the Anglo-Saxon, right? And the point is that there are differences, but they would have been able to understand each other. What is lost in translation are the grammatical elements. So what we're trying to say there is that when the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons were discussing things, their languages were very similar to what happened to the native British languages? That's the thing. That is the big thing. The same processes that changed the language spoken in Britain 1,200 years ago also led to the development of languages elsewhere. So this talks about languages and all those types of things. Now, Anglo-Saxon apartheid and Scandinavian multi-ethnic culture. We'll look at an event that happened in 1002 when I go to my notes, right? And in 1002 on Friday the 13th, Bryce's Day, the Anglo-Saxon King Ethelred gave an order that all Vikings in Britain should be killed. Now so the Anglo-Saxons want to wipe out the Vikings in Britain. The Normans didn't do that. The Normans did a lot of damage. The Romans certainly didn't do that. So it's the Anglo-Saxons that are the terrible ones. And you made the point earlier on, which Goff made a point earlier on, Mike, about there's this presenter on television called Dan Snow, right? And he was saying that he's been saying that what was he saying, Goff, that the Celts saved the British?
Yeah.
The problem is with that, Mike, is that I don't believe in this Celtic invasion. I don't. And we've got DNA in Britain that says that we can trace some of our ancestors back tens of thousands of years, right? But the point is that the ones that are doing the real damage are the Anglo-Saxons. And it says here the Anglo-Saxons practice a sort of apartheid against the local Celtic speaking people between the late 400s and the 800s, where they probably lived apart or only had limited interaction. This was a bit like South Africa. And Henry's going to join us, which is great. So we're joined by somebody else as well. It says that ethnic cleansing by the Anglo-Saxons is a likely alternative scenario, as suggested by the fact that native languages and cultures survived in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. Good to see you, Henry. We've got Mike over here, and we've got Goff, and that's Henry. So we've got one from the Rhondda class, we've got one from Bridgend, and we've got one from Lantwit.
Right.
So what we're doing. Jessica sent me an article, Henry, and it was loosely linked to what we're doing today.
Okay.
So Goff saw that program with Dan Snow talking about a Celtic invasion, which is absolute nonsense, because lots of what was in Britain already existed before anyone came over here. You know, we were able to create beautiful art. We didn't need that idea of those fictitious Celts to help us, right? So then we've moved on, and we said that the Romans really didn't wipe things out, and they kept things going in the sense of Pax Romana. The Normans were quite brutal, but they weren't as bad as the Anglo-Saxons. And then when we look at the Vikings, who is doing the damage is actually the Anglo-Saxons. So this where it leads me. This thing in front of this article in front leads us what I wanted to do today, in a way, right? Because what we end up, we look at Weymouth Harbour, and we look at a massacre of 50 odd individuals under the hands of the Anglo-Saxons. They just massacre a group of Vikings. So it's now looking like the Anglo-Saxons are the ones who are the ones causing the problems, and the Anglo-Saxons are the ones who are responsible for eradicating the native languages of England. And the Anglo-Saxons are responsible on the 13th, Friday the 13th in the year 1002, for ordering that all Vikings in England be slaughtered. So you go back to this article, ethnic cleansing by the Anglo-Saxons. Additionally, the Romans and the British were less well organized and lived in a vacuum after the Romans left or things started to decline in Britain in the 400s. Whereas the later Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of the 800 were better organized. Thus, Anglo-Saxon England was harder to conquer in a similar way. The Vikings most likely married into Anglo-Saxon families over time. Yes, maybe the children of the Scandinavians were raised by Anglo-Saxon servants, as was the case among white American children in the southern states, where African slaves took care of white children. And here we go. In the USA, white children often adopted words from African Americans before they were sent to boarding schools in the north to learn proper English, or sent over to England. Whether poor servants played a similar role among the Vikings in Danelaw, England, which is the East Coast, Norfolk and Kent, we do not know, but the lack of boarding schools for re-education back home could explain why Old Norse did not gain too much ground. So in other words, we've got loads of Vikings, but the predominant people are the Anglo-Saxons always. So there isn't this mass slaughter under the hands of the under the hands of the Vikings across England. It's in fact the Anglo-Saxons who are doing the damage. Linguistics suggests that if Scandinavians and Anglo-Saxons had not met up and in that process modified each other's languages, people in England today would speak something more Danish, depending on whether the Anglo-Saxons or Vikings had won the language clash. So we're going on. We're talking about we're talking here about place names in England. The Anglo-Saxon place names such as Ham, such as Clapham, such as Hawkstow, and Ton, like Brighton. The place names of the Scandinavians end in by or ing, and basically what we do see is that the Scandinavians bring in Grimsby and Derby, for example, and the word by is in Sweden still a small hamlet, or otherwise known as a stad. A wick, as in the Vale of Morgan, is also seen as a Scandinavian origin, as in Swainswick. And Thorpe's another one that the Vikings introduced. The last name suggests that the Scandinavians initially founded a number of field systems, which they indicate that they settled on land. So this is where we get those place names from. We know that Alfred the Great stopped the Vikings, and you know that's clear. Alfred's policy of identity kept the Danish language at bay. Alfred the Great, in the 800s, Alfred was now much more alert and mobilized the English against the Danes. He also rebuilt a number of monasteries and schools. He started using English instead of Latin as a basis for further education, and he initiated the first translation of Bede, the history of the English. He knew that without a history, the English had no identity against the Danes. Thus, he saved the English language against this constant sort of Vikingism. And this is one thing I say, that you know, you've got to have a sense of identity. So the Vikings had a great deal of bad press, which we're going to go on to after we've done this. The Vikings had bad press at the hands of the Anglo-Saxons. Even though the Christian chronicles complained about the Viking invasions, and written and archaeological sources confirm that the Vikings came in large numbers, with modern eyes and evidence, it seems that the Viking invasion was not as massive as the Anglo-Saxon invasion 400 years earlier. But we're actually saying that it wasn't so much an Anglo-Saxon invasion, it was a group of bloodthirsty warriors. And if you didn't do what you were told, they would kill you. And this is what the evidence is saying about the Anglo-Saxons. The same is said about the Vikings, but the Vikings did settle and things were rather different. It's talking about, we're talking about lots of studies, and we're saying that finally the same studies suggest that the flow of Anglo-Saxon immigration must have been so massive that they came to consist of up to 40% of the population in England at the time. I don't really agree with that, but there were numbers of Anglo-Saxons who were quite bloodthirsty. And the Vikings did not come close to that. And where the earlier Anglo-Saxons apparently did not mix with the native Britons, the Vikings did exactly that with the now Anglo-Saxon English. By these measures, the Vikings were not as bad as the name and the written sources suggest. If the Viking Age is to be defined as the period where piracy, migration, and ethnic cleansing was predominant, the period should start much earlier. In other words, piracy, migration, ethnic cleansing is at the hands of the Anglo-Saxons and not the Vikings. Of course, as Goff said, there is more to the Viking Age than piracy and pillaging, but this is another story for another day, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So I know this has been a bit of a random thing to stick in there, and it's been a bit disjointed, but Jessica said, have a look at this. And I thought, right, great. We'll have a look at this. And it was really useful, because then that leads me on to the article, what we're going to do. I'll go on then. What do you think this is? And it's like, come on, any ideas?
Ooh. I'm not sure.
Think about a weapon.
Hilt.
What was that? What was that, Henry?
Sword hilt.
Yes, it's a sword hilt. Sword handle, sword handle, sword hilt. This is what this is, and there's the guard. Basically, you're right. You're right. This basically, the rest of the sword actually survives. This is associated with something known as the scar ship burial, right?
Oh yeah.
You know it well, Mike. Yeah? It's found on the island of Sandy in the 1990s. Was reported to the archaeologist Julie Gibson. Emergency excavation. We might go on to that. Okay, so this is actually a Viking sword. Now, that helps us to start off a little bit more. And how that helps us to start off a little bit more is quite simple. Because what's going on is that this is from the island of Orkney, and there's one thing about the island of Orkney. When we look at the island of Orkney, We find that the Vikings settled extensively on Orkney. Now, the Vikings have had a lot of bad publicity on Orkney. It's said that the Vikings wiped out the native population. But equally, by the time the Vikings got there were very few people living there because of a disease that wiped out the Picts, which is something I believe in. When you've got ethnic cleansing, you've usually got holes in the ground with lots of bodies.
True.
Where you find with Weymouth, where the Anglo-Saxons killed 50-odd Viking individuals. That's when you see ethnic cleansing. You don't find that evidence when you look at Orkney. You don't find you don't find pits with loads of Picts buried in there. Picts being the native population of Scotland at this time that we're talking about when the Vikings got to Orkney. Now, this is another thing, that the Vikings came over to Britain a lot earlier than we're told, right? The biggest thing, there's been a lot about that Did you see that program on TV, Mike, called The Dig?
Yeah.
That was good, wasn't it? Did you not? Well, hang on. It was good to start off with, then it went a bit awry. You saw that as well, didn't you, Henry? The Dig.
Yeah, I did.
Did you see it as well, Goff?
Yeah.
Now, I thought it started off really well. It's really good promise, and then it just went downhill because we saw less and less of the archaeology, and on that sex scene at the end, it just wasn't needed because it was like, yeah, they threw a bit of sex in there at the end, and it just didn't do anything to the film. Well, that's the only reason why Mike watched it, but that's not the reason why I watched it. Okay.
Are you sure?
He can't even remember the sex scene because it was only on there for seconds. But the point is, the dig basically discussed an Anglo-Saxon ship, but it didn't say where the stuff came from. It came from Sweden. Now, the last time I looked, Sweden is not full of Anglo-Saxons; it's full of Vikings, right? So in other words, when we look at this period, what we do find is that there's more talk about the Anglo-Saxons than the Vikings. That the Anglo-Saxons seem to get all the good publicity, including the Sutton Hoo ship burial, which is 90% not Anglo-Saxon. And the Vikings get all the bad publicity. They killed all the people in Orkney. They raped and pillaged at Lindisfarne, right? But when we actually look at the evidence is something else. Just as Mike said, that about a Viking wintering ground on the Isle of Wight. What's all that about? Ship burials on Orkney, right? They had time to have ship burials on Orkney and all these wonderful things, right? So, and the Vikings, they're just so cultured, right? They're so cultured. When we look, for example, there was, do you know what I'm going to do? This wasn't going to be something that we were going to do, but I'm just going to type in this, right? It's good to, this is one advantage that I've got over Jessica today, right? I got the computer, I could just chuck stuff up there. So this is rather interesting, right? We're going to enlarge on this one if I can get it on the screen. And we're going to, okay, let's just do this. This was found in 2017. This is known as the Silverdale Hoard, right? Well, I think it was found before 2017. This is the Silverdale Hoard, right? This was found in Cumbria, and it's a Viking hoard, right? Now, the Vikings were massively skilled. As you could probably tell, I'm much more of a fan of the Vikings than the bloody Anglo-Saxons, right? And these people went around communities and they said, any old iron? No, it'd be any old silver. And basically, people would bring their silver out and they would say, give me something for this. And the silversmith, the Viking silversmith, would say, you know, yeah, and this was all buried somewhere, and he was going to come back and he was going to melt it all down. He was going to make wonderful silver objects in places like York. For some reason, the Viking didn't come back for this hoard. He didn't come back for it, or maybe he thought, oh crap, it's a load of old bling. I don't want it, right? And he just left it in the ground. The main thing is, what this tells you is that there were Vikings wandering around the place saying any old iron, right? A bit like me, a good old Jippo, right? And they would, you know, that's culture. They trusted the Viking metal silversmith, right? They trusted the silversmith with their silver, because most of this stuff isn't being nicked. It's bits of silver. It's broken bits of silver. And you look at this, and it's one or two other things are complete, but it's broken bits of silver mainly, right? So obviously the person hasn't gone into a house and say, oh, by the way, you know, you got that pendant? Give it over here. I'll smash it into two and I'll kill you, right? So in other words, somebody saying, here's my silver bracelet. It's broken. Do you want to melt it down? Now, that itself is the way of the Anglo-Saxons. That is the way of the Vikings, and not the way of the Anglo-Saxons. And we're seeing a lot more. What we were told about the Vikings at school was very, very different than what we know, what we now know. And this is a really important point. Oh my God, I've definitely got into it, Mike, haven't you? Flipping egg. Shut up, Mike. I do the talking, yeah? Right? When Mike's here on Tuesday, I'm usually saying, what should we do? Well, yeah, we'll do this. This is okay? Yeah, we have a chat about it, right? So there you go. So anyway, going back to where we were, what I want to do is I want to move away from this image about the sword hilt and the guard. And, oh, bingo, this one, Weymouth. Right now, unfortunately, when I did this on Tuesday, we did it for like ages. We did it for so long that we never ever got to the Scar ship burial, and we didn't do it, right? And I want to do the Scar ship burial because I just want to give you a couple of aspects about the Vikings. And what we see at Weymouth is that we see a collection of skulls and a collection of human remains, right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to make sure I got my facts up on the screen. Yeah. This was a site known as Ridgeway Hill, which is near, which is basically in Dorset near Weymouth Harbour. And these were actually found by complete accident. They found 54 skeletons and 51 heads, right? So in other words, 3 of the heads had gone walkies, right? So 50 odd sets of human remains, 54 to be precise. And these dated between around the 970s, looking at DNA, and 1025. Now, I don't believe that they were all deposited in the ground at one moment. I believe that this was a place that the Vikings were taken to be beheaded. And the bodies were just left open and exposed as what people used to do, what people used to do. We see this on battlefields, what we see. And because I teach another class on a Wednesday for people interested in the Romans, and next week we're going to be looking at Varus, and what the massacre of Varus in the Teutoburg forest in Germany. Mike, it was a massacre of 2 Roman legions, yeah. Right? You like that, don't you? In the latter part of the year 9 AD, right? So 2 Roman legions were wiped out, right? And what the Germanic people did, they stripped the Roman soldiers of their clothing and just left them naked on the landscape, right? Now, how humiliating is that, right? For all your private parts and everything to be borne out, to be pecked at by the crows, right? That's just so insulting. That's just so bad. And the same thing we do believe happened with these individuals. They were stripped naked, and it was a sense of great shame that these Vikings were now naked, and they were being slaughtered. They were being beheaded. When I use the word slaughtered, some of the it was a sight that they were beheaded. When they were being beheaded, likely by a sword, the person occasionally missed the neck and hit into the skull. In one example, the guy must have been so pissed as he's cutting the guy's head off that he cut the top of the skull off, and the person's still alive and in absolute agony, and everyone's going, "Oh, that's terrible." Yeah. So and the great to be the only comparison with this burial, this Viking ship burial, the great is what happened to victims of the concentration camps in the Second World War, the gypsy community, the prisoners, the Jewish community in the Second World War, where they would be stripped of their clothing, and they would all go naked into the gas chamber, or they would be shot naked. That is just so humiliating. And this is exactly what happened to these people back in the day, over 1,000 years ago. To be naked and to be executed is so humiliating. It's just it's the lowest of the low. Anyway, let's go back to this. We do actually have a look at these images quite fairly well. And interestingly enough, there's this. What we do find is that lots of the people buried at Weymouth Harbour, these Vikings were slaughtered in this pit at Weymouth Harbour, showed diseases that you could probably cure today. Basically, this person had a bone disease, and that hole in there would seep out putrefying goos on a regular basis from the person's leg. Basically, it would ooze, and the person, this is actually this is a femur. Okay, this is the leg bone. This is a femur, and the person was obviously able to walk, because they wouldn't have been executed in the pit in the first place if they. And these were Vikings. They'd come all the way from Scandinavia, and this person would ooze this putrefying ooze, and that was somebody who was actually buried in this pit. But there's a few really unusual things about the people buried in this pit at Weymouth, at Ridgeway at Weymouth. So, Vikings. So that's basically that's actually pretty accurate, to be honest with you. This is a medieval chronicle, and they paint these Vikings as being invaders, adventurers, raping and pillaging. But the word Viking wasn't really understood until the 1800s, later 1800s. They used to say the word Viking only had the negative tone that it has today. If you want to look at the film Viking, Kurt Douglas, and it was Tony Curtis, wasn't it? And you can remember the film, can't you? And it's just like boo, and you've got these Vikings almost raping and pillaging, doing terrible things. And at the end, the Anglo-Saxons held out, and all these other things. And it's because of Hollywood that the word Viking has become really negative. But we've all done a bit of Vikinging, haven't we? Goff does it on a regular basis. He goes on holiday. He goes adventuring. That's to go Vikinging. Okay, when you go adventuring and exploring, and you wandering up in the mountains with a good old woman, right? You're going Vikinging. So you can take a woman and say, let's go Vikinging. That's what Vikinging means. It goes to explore. It doesn't mean to rape and pillage. So when I wanted to do this, we'll just come back to this in a sec. When I wanted to do this, I thought, right, when I was planning this, actually, I thought, right, we'll try and look at the early medieval period in regards to the Vikings in Wales. And I thought, all right, what we'll do a little bit of Shetland, right? And then we'll do a little bit of this. And then we'll do a little bit of this. And to be honest with you, everything went on to this site, the site of these bodies. Right. So in other words, what I did, I just didn't develop the other bits of the talk that I wanted to. And because I actually wanted to give another perspective, the whole point of this today and the whole point of what we've been doing over the past few months is by looking at the early medieval period and what's going on. We've looked at monasteries, we've looked at sort of a little bit about King Arthur. We've looked at different things like that. And the next time that we do this, we're gonna have a little bit of a stab at the Anglo-Saxons. So I'm just gonna make sure that I actually write that down. So not next week, but the following week we'll be looking at the Anglo-Saxons. The early Anglo-Saxons, and I wanted to look at the early Vikings as well in Britain, and sort of we sort of do that. Now this is rather interesting. You're looking at this and you're thinking in North Wales, and you're looking in Merseyside and Liverpool and all the rest of it, Connors Quay, and you're looking up there and you're thinking, oh, there's loads of stuff. There's loads of stuff on the right hand side of the screen. There's loads of settlements and place names and so on and so on. And you actually look at this and you think, right, okay, brilliant, right? So obviously the Vikings were doing more stuff over there than they were doing in Wales. But the reason why we've got more stuff going on in England is because there's been more research, so there's been more developments, there's been more buildings developed. And if you look at the peninsula there, that you've got loads of evidence of settlements, and again you've got evidence of loads of settlements because that's where there's been lots of archaeological work. So that's why there's more information, that's why there's more stuff going on. So we're looking at this and we're thinking, actually we don't have as much archaeological work going on in Wales, so we think, right, there's not a lot of Viking stuff going on in Wales, but there probably was, right? And most of the stuff that we're going on with the likes of the Vikings in Wales are in this neck of the woods, a place called Llanbrydreigoch. And Llanbrydreigoch is a site that we've got evidence of Vikinging. We've got evidence of Viking burials. We've got a possible Viking settlements in this part of Anglesey, and that's rather interesting. And it's rather interesting because we've got these little crosses. We've got lots of silver hoards, and knowing the people of Merseyside, you can imagine that the reason why no silver hoards have been reported is because they probably disappeared. That's a terrible thing to say. But you've got lots of Viking hoards in Anglesey. And one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to chuck something at my chickens because they're doing my head in. Hang on a minute. Mike, where's that bloody rock? Hang on, give him a bloody biscuit. Hang on a minute, boys. Shut up! I'm trying to freaking teach you. Look, look, if it wasn't for me, you'd have nothing to eat. Now shut up. That sorted them out, didn't it, Mike? That sort of did it. That sort of put them in their place. That sort of did it. I tell you what, you don't get this in Jessica's classes. You never do, right? Now, the point I was trying to make is that there's lots going on in regards to the Vikings in Wales. It's just that we haven't got that much evidence. If you want to compare it with there, but what there is because there's not been a lot of archaeological work in Wales. If you notice that the Viking sites are all the way along the coast, most of the Viking evidence is associated with the coast, and that's where most of the archaeological excavation work has been. It's that we haven't excavated in lots of those upland areas to actually find the stuff that would give us more information about the Vikings. Now what we do find is that there's it's saying that there's a fair bit of Viking evidence in West Wales along the coast. That there's these sites, sort of Newport and north of Cardiff. One site that's really interests me is actually the little thing by there. So if we get this on the board, annotation, annotation. Does anyone remember Roy Castle? I used to love him. He was great. Actually, no, we want to get rid of that. Hang on, I got the wrong doodah in here. Right, here we go. Excellent. That's hang on a minute. There, good. The site I want to go to is there. Right, that's known as the Atlantic Trading Estate in Barry. Now, what happened is that I was involved in the excavations there years ago as a young volunteer, and they were excavating at this site, and there was a root stone found. Right. A runestone. Did I say a runestone? Yeah, I was meant to say that because when I was on the excavation, Somebody said, I found a root stone. I thought, what's a root stone? Is it a stone with rude graffiti on it? It actually turned out to be a rune stone. Rune stone. And actually, what we've got is evidence of a Viking settlement in Barry, there, where those arrows are at Atlantic Trading Estate. And there was these great storage silos in the ground and all the rest of it. It was on marginal land, the worst land that you could ever live on, right? And the reason why the Vikings were living there is because they had nowhere else to live. You know, that's the only spot that they could put aside for them to live. There is possible evidence that the Vikings may have had a settlement on Flatholm, and then the nearest stuff that then you do have is going towards Porthcawl, and you've got the big one, Swansea. So you do have Viking stuff going on, and it's believed that at Nash Point, where you've got the lighthouses. There's Nash Point,
Yep.
and you've got the you drive into the Valley of Nash, and you've got the place of the lighthouses, and you park your car alongside the tea and coffee shop there, and as you walk towards the lighthouses, on the right there's a weird sort of monument which is known as the Old Church. That's believed to have been the place of a Viking burial. Like some say a ship burial, but it's never really been excavated. There is Viking evidence in the area, but the main thing is, what does this tell us, Mike, before you fall asleep? Well, this tells us that the Vikings themselves, you have got a comfy seat there, Mike.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, good. Well, it's okay to fall asleep, as long as you don't snore. What all this tells us is that the Vikings were settling. They were getting on with the local people. The local people said, well, you can come here, but you can go over there, right? Go over there. Leave us alone. Go over there. And that's basically what was happening. This is what all of this tells us. So there weren't these great Vikings in the area raping and pillaging. Things just carried on. And the other thing as well is, right, this makes sense to the next thing I'm going to say, right? If the Vikings invaded Wales and killed all the people, why have we still got a Welsh language? Voila! Right, so there we go. So what we're saying is that the Vikings were a lot less bloodthirsty than history tells us. So then what we do have, we go this. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever been. This is an absolutely wonderful site. One thing we're not going to do is repeat what we did the other week. The other week we were looking at Pictish stones. On the Pictish, we looked at a Pictish stone at a site known as Bursay, which is on Orkney. And this site at Bursay on Orkney, there's lots of Viking evidence, and we mentioned the Pictish stone. And basically what we see is that the Picts are about, and then the Vikings come along, and if any Picts are around, that they would intermingle, and the Vikings needed the Picts as much as the Picts needed them. If there were any Picts still in Orkney, but we see in Scotland that the Vikings and the Picts probably got on quite well. But this site itself is at a place known as Jarl's Hoft. Okay, Jarl's Hoft. A Jarl is a lord. Okay, so Jarl's Hoft's lordship. Jarl's Hoft is actually on not on Orkney, but this is actually on Shetland. Right, so we've got lots of Viking evidence on Orkney. We've got lots of Viking evidence on Shetland. Right, so Bursay's and Orkney, where I just mentioned, this site is on Shetland, Jarl's Hoft. And all those buildings that you can see in the forefront are actually Viking buildings.
Is that on a river there, like a dock there?
Well, actually, Mike, it's alongside the sea.
No, the strip there.
That's the sea.
Yeah, outside, but you can see in the middle, looks like a river.
Oh, right, no, it's not. It's actually, Mike, that's a good question. That is actually the beaten stone floor. That's a beaten stone floor. It's not a river. Oh, right, yeah, no, I see what you mean there. Yeah, it looks like that. Yeah, no, it's a beaten stone floor. I've been to this site. It was absolutely amazing site. And what they've done excavating here, they've excavated the walls of the Viking buildings. This is one of the best preserved Viking sites in the whole of Britain. What they've done, they've excavated the walls, and what they've then done is put a little bit of a membrane on top.
Oh, yeah.
And then they put soil and they've seeded it again, and it all looks really good. It looks really, really well presented. I tell you what, the Scots do a hell of a lot better job with their history and archaeology than we in this pitiful little country have ever done. And it's for us all to see. And the other main thing is that the what happened is that there was a Bronze Age site here. Then there was an Iron Age site represented by this circular Brock building, right? And that's the Brock building. That's the sort of wheelhouse which is alongside the Brock building. So those buildings date into the Iron Age. And then what we do find is that there's Pictish evidence that we know that the Picts can the Picts were like a continuation of the Iron Age people, and then the Vikings come on to Shetland. Now we don't really know what happened to the Picts on Shetland because it's a different island altogether, but it's likely that there's lots of Picts still around, and they simply assisted the Vikings. The Vikings assisted them, and everyone lived happily ever after. This is in Shetland. Shetland was still belonged to Norway until about the 1400s. It was still part of the domain of Norway. And to be honest with you, the people of Shetland wouldn't probably care if it was part of Scotland or Norway. They probably prefer to be part of Norway. But the one thing that this evidence tells us is that primarily on this site, Mike,
Yeah.
are the Vikings raping or pillaging, or are they settling?
Settling, I would say.
Settling. That's it. You can't. Yeah, if you're constantly raping and pillaging, well, you're going to run out sooner or later, aren't you? You know, you're going to run out of those monks to rape and those women to pillage, and it was probably around that way because the women would have been more valuable as trade objects, undefiled, where the monks could be defiled at their will. But then again, is any of that true at all? Is any of what I've just said true? And in fact, they were actually settlers. And actually, the great site at Burzay, I'll show you this. I mentioned this site at Burzay, and I know we did a talk on it, but I'm just going to show you the Burzay site again. I may as well. Burzay Vikings. Let's just have a quick look at that. That's at images. Right, here we go. It's quite easy. And oh, actually, there's some really nice images here. We're just going to show you on the screen. I've seen this one before. Let's share this new screen. This is I mentioned at all of what you can see there is a drainage ditch associated with the Viking site at Burzay. But what you can say is this is the North settlement of Burzay. These are the Viking buildings at on Burzay, Orkney, and hang on a minute. All of these buildings here are mainly of Viking origin. And look at these buildings. And in fact, the Vikings would have still been in control of Orkney when they built this church, because the Vikings converted to Christianity. So that's the site of Burzay and Orkney. But back to our site at Jarlshoft, if we may actually go there. Jarlshoft is obviously the pure evidence to say that the Vikings weren't this people that they got in history. They had settlers, and they were settling this site for a very, very long period of time. They've got many buildings that you can actually see on display with drainage and all the wonderful buildings. Now, folks, the next thing I've convinced you of, that they're more settlers, haven't I? And they're not of the Hollywood films and the seasoned Vikings, which I still think that's being filmed, isn't it? The Vikings, that television series. Now the next thing we need to go on to was who's worse, with the Vikings or the Anglo-Saxons, right? And you'll probably come along to my way of thinking that the Vikings. And as we read that article out in the beginning, very different publicity. Now, obviously, a Viking long vessel, and as these Viking long vessels got to the coast of Britain, they would come across these geezers, who were able to fight, very well armed, and the Vikings had to deal with these people. and you start to think, well, the Vikings had to deal with these people, then, you know, some fighting or some shenanigans must have gone on. But what we're going to do, we're going to chuck 2 facts at everyone, right? Now, the first fact is the 26th of September in the year 1066, and the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Viking army was wiped out by the Anglo-Saxons just before the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October in 1066. Right. So the Anglo-Saxons wiped out the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Right. One fact. Now that sort of, you know, were these Vikings as butch and as bloodthirsty as Hollywood makes them out to be? The fact is that they're not, right? The other thing as well is, if we go back to an early image, can you see this medieval manuscript? Can you see horns on their helmets? You can't see any helmets at all, because these are basically leather caps.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're going into battle, right? Where's my sword, Mike? Anyway, when they're going into battle, if you've got a very thick leather cap on, right, you're able to maneuver your head to see everyone around you, right? It doesn't give you much protection, but nor does an iron helmet. If an arrow can go through an iron helmet as much as an arrow can go through a leather cap, right? If you've got somebody and their sword isn't that sharp, it would cut through the leather cap, but it would deal with the impact, right? It would go through a metal helmet probably quite quickly, right? So the Vikings wore leather caps, and to be honest with you, if you've got 30 guys on a boat and they've all got metal helmets, that's quite a lot of weight. So it's better to have your leather cap. You know, it's better to go to sea having something to eat than it is to wear than it is to actually wear a metal cap. You know, it's better to have a leather cap. So anyway, moving on a little bit more. So what we do have is that's what you see of Hollywood, but these are traders primarily. They would not have been able to establish the settlement at Dublin, right, in the 800s and 900s if they were raping and pillaging all the time, right? And York as well. York, York itself was taken over by the Vikings, but then eventually the Vikings were kicked out of York, right? Or were they all kicked out? You know, the trade went on and so on. But the Vikings, they were kicked out of Dublin eventually. By whom? You know what I mean? And so primarily the Vikings are traders. They to go Vikinging. They're more to do with that than they are anything else. Ridgeway Down. Now, this site itself is an absolutely fascinating site. And I said Ridgeway Down, Ridgeway Hill. Ridgeway Down was a battle in the Civil War. Ridgeway Hill, near Weymouth. And there is the pit on the screen. So if we could sort of go there. And it was part of, a 50,000 meter square archaeological excavation. And guess what, folks? They reported what they had found as part of this development in England, but it seems that we don't find anything in Wales anymore. Chucking that out in there. Nothing was reported from your housing estate in Wick, wonderful Henry, right? No burial mounds were ever found when we knew there were burial mounds there. Cowbridge, for example, nothing was found in Cowbridge recently, even though it's alongside a major Roman town. Nothing was found at all. 5 Mile Lane, nothing was found at all. Other than 500 bodies and thousands of artifacts, nothing was found at all. But in England, they report their archaeology. And when you report their archaeology, it changes history, Mike. When you get out there and you tell people things and you share your information, it changes history, as this find has done. This has changed our perception of these Vikings, right? Look, Mike, I know you want your apple tart with a bit of cream and a cup of tea, right? But you're gonna have to wait, okay?
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, okay, but you don't have to go on about it. For God's sake, he's like a frigging child. Henry, are you sure you haven't had second thoughts about joining me online? But mind you, right? Can I share a secret with all of you, right? I will get you on full screen, right? Goff,
Yeah.
you're going to thank me for the following, right? Last Thursday, right, Anne in Bridgend was tasked with the job of finding a meeting place, right? And it turned out that when she came to the meeting late, I had already decided that everybody's going to be doing it via Zoom this week from Bridgend, right? We were going to cancel a class in the afternoon in Bridgend, right? So before Anne come on, I thought if Anne joins this class in the morning, Goff is not going to stay long, right? So what I did, I texted Anne and said, oh, you're joining a Tuesday evening class, right? And then I said, and then when she came on, I then said, oh, everybody, are you joining the Thursday morning class? And Anne said, oh, I want to join that. And she says, no, you can't. You're already doing a Tuesday evening. So the others were going to do Thursday morning, right? But she was going to do Tuesday evening. And I did that for you, Goff. Thank you. Anyway, back to these Vikings. Back to these Vikings. Oh, hey, should I tell them what happened last night, Mike?
You can do, yeah.
Right. This is what happened last night, right? Michelle had come back late from wherever she'd gone to the allotment and the goats and stuff, and she come back about 10:20, right? And who should be coming down the lane is Mike last night, right? At 10:20. And Michelle said, "What are you doing here?" And Mike said, "Oh, I've come for the class. It's starting at 10:30, right?" Right. And when Mike sits down, I says, Mike, I said 10 a.m. on Thursday. And he said, yeah, I know it's 10 a.m. on Thursday. It's 10 a.m. now, he said, and this was 10:30 last night now. He'd only fallen asleep in the bloody day, and he'd woken up and he thought it was dark in the morning, and he came out to the class at 10:30 last night. So if you think the people are odd in Bridgend, look at what I've got to put up with. And we had to give them a bloody cup of tea. And I hope for your bloody sake there's an apple pie left, because if they're not, right, I'm having the apple pie and you're not. Anyway, back to what we were talking about, right? Back to where we were. And an amazing find, an absolutely amazing find as part of the work alongside the new bypass going down to Weymouth. They were widening the road, and it was 50,000 square meters of an excavation. A phenomenal project, and the lot that they found. So let's get to one of those images. And you know what I'm like. I'm a little bit of a sentimentalist. I don't like to show images of human remains like this, because I feel that they've lost a lot of their dignity. But because this is such a major piece of archaeological evidence, Mike, they constructed a new museum, in Weymouth, and they've actually put all the bodies back together in a reconstructed pit. They've actually put them all back together, and you can see this. And I think it's a fitting landmark to say that there's something else going on in history other than the Vikings going to places raping and pillaging. So what I'm probably going to do, I'm going to discuss a little bit of information, and then I'm going to phone the Lantwick Major class actually in Lantwick Major and see if there's any questions from anybody, and we could do all the questions together with Jessica on speaker, right? So that's what we'll do. So let's do a few facts. So I know Goths are going to complain at the end of today that there weren't enough images, but it's tough. The Ridgeway Hill Viking burial pit at Ridgeway near Weymouth, Dorset, was a mass grave of 54 skeletons and 51 heads of Scandinavian men excavated, and they dated between the late 900s and into the early 1000s. Now, that's really interesting because we know Ethelred, an edict of Ethelred, the King Ethelred, it was the Friday the 13th edict. It's not the only time that you get Friday the 13th. The dissolution of the Knights Templars in 1307 on Friday the 13th of October back then. So this is Friday the 13th. It's known as St. Brice's Day. And on St. Brice's Day, the edict was that all Vikings in Britain were to be executed. All of them. All the Vikings in Britain were to be killed. So that was it. It's a bit like the final solution, the Heinrich final solution of 1941. It's a bit like all those King Herod wanting the all the firstborn or whatever to be killed. You know, it's those terrible moments in history, and whether these bodies have anything to do anything to do with St. Brice's Day. Because it might do, because the radiocarbon dates are a little bit sketchy, late 900s, early 1000s, so it could be St. Brice's Day that these people were slaughtered. But the strange thing is they're all men. There's no women amongst them at all. So they would have killed the women as well. So what is going on here? This is the big question. So the men are believed to have all been Vikings, and they are believed to have been executed by the local population. At that point, most of the local population would have been Anglo-Saxon. Now, can I just interject a minute? When we were doing a little article earlier on, it mentioned that 40% of the British population at one stage would have been Anglo-Saxon. I disagree with that massively, because the evidence doesn't tell us that. But there would have been a substantial Anglo-Saxon population in Britain. The way I get around that is by saying, if you've got all these Anglo-Saxons in Britain, who was living in Germany at the time? Do you know what I mean? So there weren't millions of Anglo-Saxons, but there were a fair few, as long as there were a fair few of Britons, a fair few Romans still living here, and so on and so on. So the dismembered skeletons were discovered by archaeologists in June 2007. And we started really looking into this in 2012, and we had a lot of information by 2017. And their identity and approximate ages were later confirmed by forensic analysis, although the immediate circumstances of the death is unknown. The event occurred at a time of conflict between the native Anglo-Saxons and the Viking invaders, and it has been suggested that the Vikings had been captured during an attempted raid into Anglo-Saxon territory. Now, that is really interesting. And why is that really interesting? Right, we're going to go back in time again, right? We're going to go back in time to another. This is how we misinterpret history a great deal. I want to show you. I want to take us back to somewhere else. Right, to land. We're actually going to go, of all places, to Llantwit Major Roman Villa.
Ooh.
Nice. And Llantwit Major Roman Villa. Bingo. Now, why am I doing the Vikings? Why am I going back to Wales? And why didn't I do this earlier on? And right, okay. Now, the year is 1886, right? And in 1886, the archaeologist John Story finds this Roman villa. And how he found it, Mike? He was wandering in a field one day, looking for magic mushrooms. And he was picking spring mushrooms. And lo and behold, he tripped over a Roman villa. The problem is with that story, this villa was known about by a chap by the name of Iolo Morgannwg, and he wrote about this site in his manuscripts in 1790. It's likely that John Story was aware of his notes, and he said, oh, he accidentally found it while looking for spring mushrooms. Anyway, long story short, right, when he was excavating the site, right, he excavated in this room. And what he found was over 30 sets of human remains, all beheaded, with a horse that had been beheaded, right? And he immediately said the following. The reason why this site was abandoned was because the local men who were trying to defend this site were all captured, were all herded into that building where the arrows are. They were all beheaded and their wives were taken away, right? And it's said this happened sometime in about the 400s. They were all taken away. And somebody's actually said that you're still looking at Viking bodies. You're not actually looking at the image that I'm looking at on the screen. You bunch of numpties.
There you are.
You've done it again. You've done it again, Goff. I'm telling you something about the Roman bloody villa, right? And you're not telling me that you're not seeing the image, you plank. There. Good.
Right.
Oh.
That's better.
Why didn't you tell me?
I did.
No. That numpty didn't tell me. You don't know about this story, Henry. I've got to bring you up to speed. I did a Wednesday evening lecture about 6 months ago, right? And I was saying, this slide tells us this and blah, blah, blah. For 1 whole hour, right, I gave the lecture. And then somebody at the end in the question said, you know, this one image that we've seen on the screen, a lot was going on in it, but I didn't see much. He forgot to tell us that the images weren't changing. Anyway, back to this image. He immediately presumed that all those individuals were local, and that told us why the site had been abandoned, why there were no remains of women on the site. That was it, right? And we believe that happened sometime in about the 400s or later, right? Years go down the line. I believe that, Goff believes that, everyone believes that. The people of this site women were taken away, over 30 odd men, whatever, right? But there was another clue that everybody ignored. Let's just go on to that one. Let's just sort of show you the other clue, right? Hang on a minute, let's see if I can find an image of it.
Pictures are changing.
Oh, cheers, love. Plonk. What shit? This is the mosaic floor in that building. Now you are seeing a mosaic floor, aren't you?
Yeah.
A bit slow.
Definitely.
He's a bit bloody slow this week, right? But anyway, the point is that there was a clue. When John Story was excavating in 1886 and 1887, there were other bodies found, and they were actually cut into the floor of the mosaic, right? And these were different from the bodies that were found scattered on the floor of the mosaic, had been beheaded. These other bodies, 5 of them, had been buried with their heads intact, and their bodies had been cut through the mosaic floor, right? So that was the clue to what's going on. And guess who the people who were resident from the villa who were buried there, the ones that were actually buried in the cut through the mosaic floor. And we know this now because radiocarbon dating, right, and strontium analysis on the teeth told us that the people that had been buried, the 5 bodies and the bodies that had been cut and buried below the floor of the mosaic, those were the local people. And the 30 plus people who were actually buried, who were buried scattered on the mosaic floor, were actually from somewhere up north. In other words, John Story had got history completely wrong, and we all believed it. We're all hoodwinked by that. What happened is this, Mike. When these raiders, all male, got to the site, they thought they were in for an easy time. The local people surrounded them and butchered them all. They beheaded them all and dumped the bodies in a room that was no longer used at the Roman villa. That is the real history. But the history is not what was told in 1886. So what we need to do is always re-examine and always look at the archaeology. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take a break. Right, we're going to we're not going to take a break. We're going to find out if there's any questions, and we're going to go over then to Jessica Fletcher, right? And actually, I tell you what, we'll go over to Jessica Fletcher now, and we'll do all the questions together. We'll see if this works. I'm sure that Jessica Fletcher would be great in Murder, She Wrote. You can imagine her with a little bag, can't you, investigate? So here we go. Let's get Jessica on here. Oh, here we go. They should be having their break now. And we're going to hear that terrible laugh. Sorry about this. Goff wants to just go. Oh, it's not ringing. We'll have to do our questions separately. Right, okay.
Gone to the pub.
They've probably all gone to the pub, yeah, with Keith. Well, okay, she'll ring me back. She should be having a break by now. Right, so what I'd like to do, Mike, you know, for 4 men together, what we could do next week, right, is we could get down to our pants and we could rub the oil on, and, you know, it's nothing wrong with that now because we're all men together. Oh, there she is. Hiya, Jess.
Oh, hi. Things going great.
Am I on speaker?
No, you are not. Do you want me to put you on speaker?
Are you on questions now? Because we are.
Oh, no, we're not. We haven't finished yet. I thought we finished at 12:30.
Oh, all right. I thought you were having your break.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of a break now, and we've had this discussion.
All right. So yeah, we're having our break now. So Mike hasn't got any questions. So we're gonna ask Henry. Have you got any questions, Henry?
No, I've enjoyed it very much.
Oh, you've enjoyed it very much. Well, yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, Jessica's hearing, so you can't say that my classes are better than Jessica yet. So you have to do it afterwards. Goff.
I haven't got much to say. What I will say is, some time ago you told me that if an archaeologist tells you something that's definitely happened, don't believe them.
Exactly. Always never believe anything that an archaeologist tells you.
Especially from Barry.
Especially from Barry.
Historian for that matter.
Definitely not believe a historian. Have you got any questions from anybody there before we have our break? From me?
No, everything seems to be fine. Just a question, Carl.
Okay.
Is there evidence that Vikings settled inland and not on the coast as well?
We do have the chapel associated with Ethelfrith, which is in London itself, but she's going to be an Anglo-Saxon saint.
Yeah,
I
I said that anything that's inland that is named after North, they're normally near the coast or
Yeah.
near rivers that they would supposed to go after.
It's quite likely that the Vikings got to London and probably did a bit of a York in London, but we don't have any more evidence than that. So
Yeah, and one thing that might be interesting to mention is the Sutton Hoo helmet has 3 motifs on the back, and one of them is missing, suggesting that it was broken, which is a Viking tradition with burial.
yes, and breaking the sword.
This is the warriors fighting and the ceremonial practice beforehand as well.
Well, the one thing I'd say about the Sutton Hoo thing, obviously, I'm for it completely being Swedish and Viking, and the other thing, which it is, because it comes from there, and the other thing as well is that the Vikings would have buried their broken swords and broken helmets, their worst of the worst, with the burials, not the best. This is what we see with the Vikings, so this is looking more Viking. And I just mention to everybody, if they can start thinking about the tea, whether they can get the tea and coffee stuff from the other hall. And if nobody else wants to ask me anything from there, we're going to have our break.
Cool. The question is, Carl, what is the next week?
We are visiting Turkey next week.
There's a lot of Turkey, Carl. Anything specific, or do you not know yet? Well,
I do know, but we're going to leave Turkey a mystery for you and I to work that out for next week.
Okay, that's fine.
So say hello to everybody for me. Goff, Henry, Gadrian, and Mike all says hello. And what we'll do is when you've finished, give me a ring. Well, I'll give you a ring when we finish because you'll have a bit of time to get to the train anyway.
Yeah, I've got the training
Yeah, and if you want to mention, if anyone else is interested in the Chester trip, find out. And if not, don't forget the collection for the room or wherever, and I'll speak to you afterwards. Say hello to everybody. Take care.
All right, take care, bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. We're gonna have a break, everybody. Straight
Right.
down to the undies. I'm not getting. No, I'm not. Mike don't wear undies, so that's fine. So we're gonna have a break, and we'll sort of put that on pause. Shut up. It was the DPD guy. He said, "Oh, it was you. If I'd have known it was you standing at the bottom of the hill in a red dress this morning, I'd have given you the parcels then," he said. Do you know, people should be able to recognise me in the red dress. Do you know what I mean? But do you know what? I've got to get back into this, Mike. I don't know how to do it. We've only had we just had like a 15-minute break, and I'm just trying to get back into this. Right, okay. Somebody's going to have to remind me where the hell we were. What were we talking about, Mike? Do you know? Because I don't bloody know. Right, okay. Oh, okay, right. Let's just get into this image, right? Let's just show you the image, right? Right. I'm going to test them out, Mike, right? What image are we looking at?
Keen bones.
A load of bone.
Beheaded people.
Big-headed people. Shut up, you.
And a yellow bucket.
And a yellow. Oh, all right. Okay. We've moved it on a bit now. We're just like, there it is. Okay. So yeah, I was talking about them actually reconstructed all of this in the museum down there in 2017. So all the bodies are together, and that's great. So that moment in time is sealed forever. But was it a moment in time? This is the thing, because if we look at those, the first thing somebody said, they look all disarticulated and disjointed, right? So you're thinking maybe they were beheaded above the pit, or maybe they were beheaded in the pit. The bodies may have just, if they were beheaded above the pit, the body must have just been chucked into the pit. We don't really know what's going on, but I don't think this is one moment in time. I don't think this all happened on the 13th of February in 1002 or whatever date. I think this is the pit that the Viking men would have been taken to be executed, and 3 of the skulls went missing. So those skulls might have been rather important or rather valuable skulls. So there's actually 2 people watching us online as well, so that's brilliant. So you know, there's I hope they're all men as well, because as we know, this is a men-only class. So anyway, we were talking about, there was an unknown event, or a series of unknown events that led to these individuals being executed. It was part of a very large-scale project between September 2008 and June 2009, and they spent 3 months excavating this pit. It's a long time to be looking at human bones. Now, one of the things I can remember saying on Tuesday, I think this is a quite an important point. Yeah, you can look at me and say you're an archaeologist and you can deal with this type of, you can deal with this, and you don't deal with it at all. What I mean by this, if you're excavating one set of human remains, right, you can connect with that individual. You can give the person a name, and you can, like we've done, like I've done. We got very fond with a body that we excavated along the coast. It was a shipwreck victim, and we called the individual Erica, and we would fondly care for her bones, and you know, we would work on her teeth, and we'd say, oh yeah, this is Erica's, and this is how we would work on it. It was fine. Yep. So we had a connection with that body, and it's very important that we have connections with human remains, because they were the same as us. They were skin and bones like us at one time. So, and they're our ancestors, so they should be treated with a massive amount of respect. And it's the same with, for example, my grandmother who passed away 2 years ago. We had the funeral, we had the surface, and we were upset, and that was it. But what we've learned, what you guys can learn, what goes through an archaeologist's mind when we find a pit like this with more than 1 or 2 bodies, is what happened in COVID. there would be whole families being buried or cremated, and it would just go over our heads. It would just be like an event. We would disconnect ourselves from that event. You know, thousands of people were dying at the height of COVID, and it wouldn't surprise me that some of us were thinking, oh, not more people died, because the individual then disappears, right? So when archaeologists are excavating a burial like this, the individualness of the event disappears, and it almost gets to be like we're working on bones, more rib bones, more skulls, and because if we didn't do that, we would get too connected, and the tragedy would come over us, and we would be ineffective as archaeologists. But then, when the bodies are all in the studio, then we can then connect with the bones, because that's exactly what they did. Because what they did, they started laying out the individuals, and then the individuals have an individual number, and then you can unite the body with the skull, and then you can think this is so and so, right? But that's when the individuals become individual again, because when they're being excavated in a pit like this, they're not individual. They're a mass group. They're an event. Something's happened. So this is how we deal. This is how we deal with human remains. There's no other way of dealing with it, because this is a huge tragedy. This is something that should not happen today, but it still happens today. This type of thing happens today. We almost judge people in the past on things that we think were absolutely abhorrent and things that would never happen again. But this type of thing does happen again. Rwanda, 1997, it happened then. Pol Pot, 1976. You know, Second World War. This keeps happening, and you've got to disconnect yourself from it. So anyway, a bit more about the details of the event. Henry asked me the question: how do they marry the right bones together? Well, this is called context, and the point is the reason why they spent 3 months excavating is because it's very important, as you're lifting the bodies out the ground, that you try to make sure you articulate from disarticulation, because these are disarticulated. They're around the place. They're movements. You know, they've been moved about by animals. And the reason why I'm thinking if this was an open pit and the people's modesty and humanity had been removed from them, is that the bodies were allowed to rot openly. They just didn't fill them with soil over. And because some of the bones have moved around, and it looks like animals may have been scavenging in there as well. So again, how do you marry this up? It's a matter of context. It's a matter of taking your time and working out that you've obviously got bloody hell, that's a long bone. Oh God. So it's a matter of keeping your ulnars and your radius together, and your tibia and your fibula together, and then linking that up with your femur. And it's called context. It's called excavation. And before we can actually go any deeper, we've got to remove the bodies above. So when we can remove the bodies above, that gives us a sense of that individual. But there's going to be teeth, and there's going to be finger bones and so on that you're not going to be able to marry up to anybody, and they're going to have to be put in a box somewhere, and we're hoping that we can get an idea. So naturally, on a fully adult set of human remains, isn't it, there's about over 250 bones, so you've got to try and marry these all up. Not for one moment that everything went together, because it wouldn't have. It's not possible. But they did a very good job of the 51 sets of human remains and the 54 skulls. So this is, if there was a metal object in there and a metal detecting enthusiast had been in there before, it would have been absolute mayhem. This is why lots of archaeologists don't like metal detecting, because it does a lot of damage to context, and it would be very difficult to read what's going on. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. So it was part of an £87 million project in 2008 as part of a relief road. bypass to Weymouth and the island of Portland, and it was being constructed in advance of the events associated with the Summer Olympics 2012. The project had attracted significant controversy as the route passes through a legally protected area of outstanding natural beauty that is of historical and ecological importance. Okay, we see this happening in Wales and all over the place. A site that's meant to be protected forever is not. The archaeological investigation was one of the largest carried out in Dorset for many years, 50,000 square metre area of archaeological excavation, which was quite a considerable area. The archaeologists discovered a burial pit on Ridgeway Hill containing what turned out to be representatively, actually, you know, when I said earlier on 51 sets of human remains and 54 skulls, 54 dismembered skeletons and 51 skulls. And so you've obviously got 54 sets of human remains and 51 skulls, and you've got 3 skulls missing, and those 3 skulls missing have been removed from the bodies and probably used as trophies. So the bodies had been thrown into the pit haphazardly, but the heads piled neatly to one side. The pit was in a disused Roman quarry, interestingly enough, used by the killers for convenience rather than specifically dug for the purpose. And this is, again, what I was talking about earlier on when we looked at Teutoburg Forest and we talked about Varus and the 12,000 legionaries lying astrewn in the Teutoburg Forest with all their armour and everything stolen. We do see this happening in regards to lots of other events in history. For example, the Boudiccan Rebellion as well, where bodies were just left strewn around the landscape, after battles. It's not unusual that human beings are treated in various different ways and they can't be bothered to backfill them or bury them. So this is likely to have been the case with this. So it lay next to what was a main road and parish boundary in Anglo-Saxon times, and quite convenient. You march these Vikings, hog-mark them down the road, and this is a place used for executions. As the burial pit was just outside the main construction area for the relief road, the archaeologists were able to excavate it in detail over the course of 3 months without significantly disrupting the road project. So 3 months of excavation is going to be needed to uncover what you're seeing, because answering your point again, Henry, you can't rush anything like this. You just can't. So the one key thing, Mike, is that all 54 sets of skeletal remains were male, almost all aged between early teenager, about 13, 14, and late teens, all the way to 25 years old. There were a couple of individuals who were in their 50s, but most of them were under 25 years old, most. So who were they? We know they were Vikings. We know they were killed. And they had all been killed, all of them being killed the notes say at the same time. I'm thinking maybe it might be 1 or 2 events. But they were all killed with a very sharp weapon, not an axe, but a sword. You can imagine all you need is this person to move, and you cut through you cut through their skull or the side of their head or something. They had not been cleanly killed, in other words, as many of them had suffered multiple blows to the vertebra. So bang, the guy's paralyzed, but he's not dead, and they go and there's evidence that that the person moved to their side and the sword went through their jawbone, cutting out their mandible, and they're still not dead. And then some of them had their heads taken off, just like that. One man had his hands sliced through, so you can imagine he's like that, and the hand stopped the blow of the sword, right? And then the guy's in absolute agony as he releases his hands, and another sword goes through. Or he may have grabbed at the sword. He may have said, "Oh, fuck now, stop this," But that's an interesting thing as well, is that they weren't bound. That's an interesting point. If he's able to, this one individual wasn't bound anyway. There were a total, so if we remember, there's 54 sets of skeletal remains, 51 skulls. Altogether, they recorded 188 visible wounds on the torso and the top part of the body, right on the head. 188 wounds calculated across the 54 bodies. So that's an average of 3 to 4 wounds per individual, meaning that the person with the sword, they didn't exactly have a very sharp sword, or they weren't a very good swordsman, typical of an Anglo-Saxon. Bloody English, indicating that they had been the victims of severe violence before being killed. One man had his top of his skull sliced off, exposing his brain. Hannibal Lecter, eat your heart out, or eat your brain out. There may well have been more injuries to soft tissue, but this is not detectable from the skeletons. So obviously, if you a facial wound or something, wasn't detectable. However, they had no obvious battle wounds. Ah, that's a good one. They had no obvious battle wounds. So what's going on? If they had been from a battle, and then they surrendered, one or two would have wounds from that battle. So that's not the case. So who were these individuals? It might have been, they may have gone out randomly gathering Viking men together who were farming in their fields. Judging from the lack of any remains of clothing or other possessions, they had probably been naked when they were thrown into the pit. And that's the point. Linen or anything else that they may have been wearing would have been quite valuable, and that would have been taken off them. And obviously, you need to take it off them before you kill them, because the last thing you want is a silk garment, because one or two of them may have been wearing silk. After all, they were Vikings, and they would have traded with the Eastern world, for example. They were naked when they were thrown into the pit. Now we've got a reconstruction showing you something different. Right, then the reconstruction, if we can get to this reconstruction, look at that there. So, that's interesting because they're being beheaded either along the side of the pit, and then wouldn't it be more convenient for them to have been executed in the pit so you don't have to move their body? That would make more sense, and then just discard their skull over there. That would make a lot more sense. Really, it would. Or maybe the church had a hand in this, Mike.
Well, they probably wanted to put the fear at the other prisoners.
Oh, that may have been a thing. Yeah, if you we've got 200 prisoners, we're going to execute 50 of them. So anyway, back to what maybe it was the church. Maybe because they were pagan and they refused to convert, they decided to execute them. But this isn't all that we've got. There's a lot more, right? There are more bodies than skulls, suggesting that 3 of the heads, perhaps of high-ranking individuals, were kept as souvenirs or put on stakes. The executions were initially thought to have occurred. Now this was the thing. Now this is really important. The initial thoughts of the archaeologists was that it was a massacre of Iron Age people by the Romans in around AD 43. It wasn't. These were from the Viking period, not the Roman period. These were from nearly 1,000 years later. So that would have been wrong, which would have been quite tragic for people. This wouldn't have been that significant then, right? Okay, it is significant if it was from the Roman period, but it wouldn't have been that significant because it wouldn't have told us anything about the Vikings, or because it was a completely different time period. That's obvious. But an analysis of teeth from 10 of the skeletons was carried out using the Geosciences Laboratory. Look at the Strontium, British Geological Survey, and this found that all 10 of these men had come from Scandinavia, with one thought to have come from the north of the Arctic Circle. So they are all Scandinavians, and had eaten a high-protein diet comparable with human remains found at sites in Sweden. Chemical evidence from the bones indicated that they had eaten diets of mixed geographical origins across that part of northern region, northern Europe, and their physical features were also very similar to Scandinavian populations at the time, and maybe some today. Now, interesting enough, one man had filed grooves into his front central upper incisors. So here we go. Let's look at those grooves. It's groovy. Let's get those grooves. Hang on a minute. Have I got those grooves? No, I haven't got those grooves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the grooves from a little article I got. Hang on, go back to that there again. Go back to that. I got a little article. I didn't manage to get that, so I'm just going to show you the article. So here we go. Article. I do have that there. Hang on. Let's go get this article up here. Here we go. I'm going to show you this article now anyway. I was going to do this article, but I've just realized that we are really massively run out of time. If anyone's interested, there's a wonderful article online, and this is it. It's this group of executed Vikings were inexperienced raiders who oozed smelly pus. Right, so let's just show you these teeth. If we go down, and what I might do is actually quickly go through this. There you go, the grooves in the front incisors. Look at that. Yeah. Now that is fascinating. That's what it describes. These front incisors, and as we've got that sort of up on the screen, if I go back to, so we've got that. So if we go back to another image, cue the other image a minute. Hang on. Go back to the pit, and I'll go back to my notes. So what we've got grooves, and we've got their teeth. That show signs of whether they belong to a tribe or a group of people. The teeth are significant. Now, the other thing that is significant, obviously, we got some of the head wounds there, and they were done at point of death or causing death. And there we go, that bone there. Now we're going to talk about that bone just briefly. So lots of the men showed that they weren't in good health. They weren't in good physical condition. So let's look at it this way. If these had been Viking raiders, why did none of them show signs of any battle damage, right? If they had been in these had been Viking raiders, and they had been on a ship, raping and pillaging along the coast, why did one of them have a leg wound like this? This is not a leg wound. This would have been something that happened in childhood. It's known as a disabling suppurating leg wound. So in other words, what happens is that you've got some kind of ulceration in the bone that collapses, and then you have a weeping sore that goes all the way through the bone into the marrow bone, and that rots on a regular basis. So in other words, this person was in absolute agony all his life, or all since he had this sort of leg wound, which would have slowed him down, and then causing the group to be slow. Or then again, he may have been captured by the Anglo-Saxon. We don't really know what's going. He may have been captured from somewhere else. Lots of people showed signs of deformity, which might tie us in with something else. It's not been mentioned, but they could have been some kind of religious community, like some kind of monastic community, and this is why large numbers of them showed signs of deformities and problems, and also showing that if they were from some kind of protected community, they wouldn't have had battle damage, because none of them were running soldiers in the first place. That's sort of one suggestion. It's probably completely wrong, but if they were soldiers, none of them showed signs of any battle damage. Another individual of the many had a deformed right leg as a result of a fractured femur. So in other words, you've got leg wounds, but not battle wounds, which is slightly different. All from childhood. Some of these are from childhood. Now, if we have a little look at some more of these images, and we sort of go back again from the pit, obviously putting the articulating the bodies And there you go. We've seen that, and it's quite a shallow pit, really. Yeah, to be honest with you, again, looking at that, I'm thinking that the reconstruction is wrong. It's a lot of effort chucking the body in there. Just chuck the body in there. The body's already there. You don't have to move it. And just discard the head over there. That makes a lot more sense. Because at the end of the day, these people want to get this out of the way. They want to get it done and dusted as soon as possible. And the other thing as well is, you know, having these people naked has another potency. Not only is it humiliating, if you don't have any clothing, you can't hide any weapons, and you can't make a last stab in the last moment. So this is what we're seeing. So again, lots of the damage to the skulls, and hang on a minute. There's our Ridgeway Hill there, the Viking burial pit. So I'll do a little bit more information, and I'm gonna, that little article that I showed you a few moments ago, we're just gonna do a quick scroll through it and pick some things out. And I just want to do that site on Orkney, if I've just got a couple of minutes, if everyone can still hang on for about 10 minutes. I did tell Jessica that she has to finish her classes at 12:30, and you guys are getting longer. Anyway, so the dead men were all of fighting age, fact, but they weren't fighters, right? Now that would seem an interesting point, but some of them had these deformities. So how were they able to be on a ship? You can't have somebody on a ship who's got these leg wounds and stuff. It just, they're not going to be any good. If you're oaring on a ship, as you know well, and we all know, your legs are important as you oar, right? That's really, your legs are not as important as you. That's true, isn't it? You need to. Yeah, and you're well, not so much mask, is that your legs are going to give you balance, aren't they, as you're oaring? Yeah. Oh, they're going to be no good. So they're Viking. They're a long way from home. What is going on? Several theories have been advanced on how they ended up there. They're causing their death. England was a scene of conflict between lots of people, the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, the native Britons, the Romans, whatever, all about that time, the late 900s, 1000s. It was initially suggested that the men might have been Saxons killed by Vikings. Now that would have been a useful, that would have made more sense, wouldn't it? Because the Vikings are killing local people, the deformities because they're local, it just makes sense, you know. But it wasn't. It was the Anglo-Saxons killing the Vikings. This is what this is. It's not Saxons on Saxons. It's Anglo-Saxons killing the Vikings. But there is actually one other point here. It could have been the Vikings killing the Vikings. However, this is in key Anglo-Saxon territory. So Anglo-Saxon on Viking makes more sense. It fits the evidence more. This was a, you're not going to have Vikings killing Vikings in the middle of an alien Anglo-Saxon territory. That just doesn't add up. So obviously we know they're Scandinavian. The site of the burial is thought to have been a formal spot, and it is possible the executions may have taken place in front of an audience. It's been suggested in a program by a Dr. Bale, known as the Viking Apocalypse, which you can get on YouTube, I think, has suggested that the executions may have been linked to the St. Brice's Day massacre. Now, the St. Brice's Day massacre, I didn't get the first bit of that, was in November the 13th in the year 1002, ordered by King Ethelred. He's also known as Ethelred the Unready, because he wasn't ready for what happened next, i.e. a Viking invasion. Probably the Vikings were so pissed off with what the Anglo-Saxons were doing to their own people they invaded. The men were, I don't go with the execution by their own people. It doesn't make sense. But then again, none of this makes any sense. However, the crudeness of the execution method and the large number of victims suggest that the event was not part of officially sanctioned criminal justice. This was hidden away around the backyard, right? if you guys haven't realised over the years, I've studied a little bit more about the Second World War than I make on, very much to do with burials and concentration camp deaths. One thing that you want to do if you're getting rid of members of society and you don't want other members of society to see it, you do it around the back door unsanctioned. The equivalent of this would be, I'm saying this, I'm not sure, I don't think anything of what I'm about to say is true, but there are echoes of it. You would have in 1938, 1939, even before the final solution, the emptying of mental asylums in Germany, and the people disposed of in pits around the corner. And this isn't just happening in Germany, this is happening in Russia and other states. So this isn't just a moment in time associated with the Germans. And when you think about it, it's done sort of around the corner, right? It's sort of done slightly out the way, in a pit, in the countryside. There's something odd about this. Just an idea, a few sort of thoughts about that. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, we've come to the end of that bit, but what I'd want to do is I'm going to, we might do a little bit of this, but I just want to quickly scroll through that document, and then we'll see what we've got. I'm going to get that document up now. Hang on, if I can find it. And where are we? Okay, there it is again. No, not that one. And there. Right. Okay. I'm gonna. Yes, we should be showing these teeth. So I just wanted to quickly show you this article. You can go through it yourselves, but obviously what we're seeing is bodies being articulated together, and actually that's quite a lot of information. Even all the toe bones, that's all great. The archaeologists took their time, and the good thing about this type of archaeology, if you go with the layers, you're able to retrieve stuff in the layers, and it all comes out at one. So obviously that sense of context. So obviously the sword wounds on the skull, and look at that there. Look at that break. So in other words, this person had 3 injustices on the top of the cranium, and also on the side of the head as well. Can you see that there? Cut through on the side of the head. So you've got 2 wounds there. You've got the 2. 1, 2. And then what we then see is, you can see that from above, and you can see that is as clear as it is. That was done seconds before the person's last breath. And you can clearly see where that's actually what you can see there. This should have given a little bit more. You can see where the chunk of the skull has been taken off there, and they sliced through there. That's quite brutal. This person had 3 blows, 3. And you're thinking that the person survived this wound, and then the back of the neck. Quite brutal, really, really is. Whatever happened, you don't do this to proper enemies. You do this to enemies that you absolutely hate. This is a part of the vertebra that you can clearly see that the sword has taken a chunk out of the vertebra. It didn't go straight through the disc. You take a chunk out of the vertebra. That would have been instant. Actually, more instant than if you'd actually gone through the disc, gone through the vertebra like that. There you can see a jawbone as well. We've got the side of the mandible there. So it's almost as if the guy went on his side, and the sword went through his mandible. His mandible's hanging off, and he's still alive. And it goes through the back of his skull. Hopefully he's not alive at that point. We've seen this, we've explained that, but you can clearly see there that this is a repairing femur, but unfortunately there's an infection and it doesn't go away. That, to be honest with you, that's a good case of bone cancer if I've ever seen one. And we go down. We've seen that. We know that. We see the teeth. Some others having these. There's not just the one body having on the incisors decoration on the incisors. So we see that with a number of others. And that's that. And then finally, what I'm going to do quickly was that I just wanted to mention the star car stuff. We're just a minute or so. So what I was going to say is we got this wonderful ship burial that was found in Orkney in 1992, excavated by Orcadian county archaeologist Julie Gibson. It was a wonderful ship burial. I know we've mentioned this before. That plaque itself is so high. I've seen it in the flesh. I've seen the replica as well in the Orkney Kirkwall Museum. So that is absolutely beautiful. Actually, I do. Actually, the two examples that I have seen, I think, are replicas. I think the original, the actual one is actually in the Edinburgh Museum. So they excavated this area of Car, and they found there a ship burial, which was slowly being eroded away. There's the island of Sanday, and that's the burial. Not Car. Car is a completely different place. So you can basically 3 individuals: a gentleman with a sword and all his regalia, with an elderly woman and his child, being buried there at Scar Bay, at Scar Beach on Sanday, not Car. That's in Northumberland. There's a wonderful comb there, typical comb of the age as well. They found so many artifacts there, and these. Oh, Henry? What are these? What are these, Mike?
I can't see what it is.
You can't see it.
No, I mean I can't work out what it is. Well, that thing on the main picture.
Yeah, what is it?
I don't know.
Any ideas, Henry?
The white thing is a bit of a necklace.
Yeah. I can't hear any of you. I'll tell you what this is. Yeah, go on.
No, not sure.
Michelle's got a set of these. These are actually shears.
Ah.
The shears that we've got for the goats are exactly the same.
Oh yeah, I can see now.
So, basically, I'll show you what we've got. By the way, guys, we'll be finished in about 2 minutes. So we got the blade there going all the way, and it comes around there, comes back along. We've got there, and that comes back there and there.
They're the squeezed ones.
And they're squeezed ones. Those are shears. So that was actually found on. Well, obviously these are settlers, aren't they? Because they wouldn't have bloody shears otherwise. And obviously the man's obviously a warrior, but you've got a sickle there. You've got other evidence of daggers. You've got the loom weights there. And you've got the sword here. You've got the tang and you've got the hilt. No evidence of the pommel, but that's his sword. Why not? Why can't he have a sword? He doesn't have to be a warrior having a sword, you know. I've got a very sharp weapon in the car if anyone comes up to me and attacks me, but I'm not a mass murderer, right? Just because you've got a sword, it doesn't mean to say you're this massive Viking warrior. And this wonderful whalebone plaque, there it is, with some gaming pieces and that stone there, really nice polished stone to hone your leather hides and so on. And there's a wonderful comb. Beautiful discovery. And it's a little vessel that they were actually buried in. And on that note, I wanted to just give you that at the end. We'll ask if there's any questions. It's gone much further on than I wanted to today. Well, I'm meant to be keeping this a lot shorter. We should actually keep. Do you know what? With only 4 of us, right? This is taking longer than if there was like 10. Bloody hell! And I have all those bloody numpties like Jim interfering with me. Oh, God. Right, okay. Henry, Jim, he's a different kettle of fish. Right, Goff, anything you'd like to say?
No questions. Very interesting. Thank you.
Good, my pleasure. And we know we're visiting a mystery location in Turkey next week. Any questions from you, Mike?
No.
Right. You can't go yet. You've got to listen to the questions. You can't bugger off yet. And what about you, Henry?
No questions. That was really enthralling. Thank you.
Excellent. So what I know next week is that we're going to be joined by one of the women next week, but we don't have Henry next week. You'll be here next week, Mike. And Goff, hopefully, will be here next week.
Inshallah.
What's that?
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Ah, ismi Karl. Assalamu alaikum. Sukram. Inshallah. Ah, yes. Fata. Sorry, we're doing a bit of Arabic there. I haven't heard inshallah for ages. Well done. Excellent. What we're going to do, if there's no other questions today, it's been a delight, Henry, Goff, and Mike. I know you've all enjoyed it. So what we're going to do, without further ado, we're going to call it a day. If there's no other questions from nobody, no. Okay. Then.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye,
Nice to
Henry.
see
See you soon. Take care.
See you
Bye.
in 2 weeks.
See you
Bye.
in 2 weeks. See you, Henry. You got me this week, you did.
Bye.
Bye. Right, so I'm gonna close this down. We're actually this went out online as well, Mike. So anyway, thanks. Anyone else still watching? Thank you very much for watching us today, and we'll call it a day. So there you go. So stop live screen.